The house was perfect. A quaint, ivy-covered cottage tucked away in the countryside, far from the noise of the city. Claire and Mark had dreamed of starting their family in such a place, away from the chaos of urban life. The moment they saw it, they knew it was where they belonged. As they settled in, the house seemed to embrace them with its charm. Sunlight filtered through the windows in soft, golden beams, and the air was always crisp and fresh. But as Claire explored the attic one afternoon, she found something unexpected. There, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten furniture, was a doll. Not just any doll, but an intricately crafted porcelain figure, dressed in an old-fashioned gown with lace details and tiny, hand-painted shoes. Its eyes were glassy and wide, staring blankly into the distance. Claire's heart skipped a beat. The doll was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. The face, though delicately painted, seemed to hold a hidden expression, one she couldn't quite place. "Mark!" Claire called, stepping back from the doll. "You have to see this." Mark wandered into the attic and took one look at the doll. He chuckled, brushing off the unease that had settled over Claire. "It's just an old doll, probably from the last owners. It could be worth something." Claire hesitated. "I don't know. It feels strange." Mark smiled and picked it up, his fingers brushing against the smooth porcelain. "It's just an old thing, Claire. Let's put it in the nursery. It'll be a nice touch." Reluctantly, Claire agreed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, after putting their baby to bed, Claire sat in the nursery with a cup of tea. She looked at the doll, now sitting on the shelf next to the crib. It was silent still, yet its presence felt oppressive. Suddenly, the doll's head turned ever so slightly. Claire blinked, her heart racing. She could have sworn it hadn't been like that before. She leaned closer, but the doll remained still, its glass eyes reflecting the dim light from the lamp. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the doll's gaze piercing into her thoughts. She eventually rose from bed and crept into the nursery, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. The doll was gone. Panic surged through her as she searched the room, flipping over furniture and pulling open drawers. It was nowhere to be found. Mark was fast asleep, unaware of the creeping dread that filled the room. When Claire returned to the crib, her heart nearly stopped. There, sitting on the shelf again, was the doll. But this time, it was smiling. The doll's once serene face had twisted into a grotesque grin. Its tiny porcelain lips were pulled into an expression so unnatural that Claire's skin crawled. The next morning, Claire researched the doll, trying to find out where it had come from. Her search led her to a forgotten name, Elias Thorne, a renowned dollmaker whose work had become famous for its terrifying realism. Thorne was known for creating dolls that were more than just lifelike. They seemed to possess a strange energy, as if they captured something more than just the essence of the people they resembled. The more she read, the worse the stories grew. People claimed that Thorne had used his dolls to trap souls, that he believed he could transfer a person's spirit into the porcelain, making them immortal. But one day, he vanished without a trace, leaving only his dolls behind. Claire's blood ran cold. She realized, with growing horror, that the doll she had found might not just be a doll. It might be a vessel, a trap. That night, Claire tried to leave the house, desperate to get away from the sinister presence that seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. But as she stepped into the hallway, she froze. The doll was standing in the doorway, as though it had moved on its own. Mark didn't believe her. "It's just your imagination, Claire. You're exhausted." But Claire knew better. She could feel it. The doll was alive, and it was waiting for something. Over the next few days, the doll's changes became more evident. Its once calm expression morphed into one of anger, then sadness, then hunger. Its hands were now smeared with something dark, a substance that looked like blood. Claire's nightmares worsened. The whispers began. And then, one night, the whispers became voices. "Help me. Free me." The voice was faint, almost a whisper in the back of her mind, but it was clear enough to freeze her blood. She had to do something. She had to destroy the doll. In the dead of night, Claire took the doll into the backyard, armed with a hammer and a trembling hand. She brought the hammer down on its head, but the doll didn't crack. Instead, it felt like she was hitting solid stone. She tried again and again, but it wouldn't break. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her, pressing in from all sides. Then suddenly, the doll's mouth opened wide, its smile stretching unnaturally. "You cannot destroy me." The voice was no longer a whisper, but a deep, guttural growl. Claire's heart raced as she stumbled backward. She dropped the hammer and ran inside, but as she reached the door, she looked back. The doll was standing in the yard, staring at her with those glassy eyes. And as it watched her retreat into the house, it smiled. Weeks later, Mark was found dead in the nursery, his eyes wide with terror. His body had been drained of life, leaving only a hollow shell behind. The doll, still on its shelf, smiled, and Claire was never seen again. The house remained as it always had, quiet, peaceful, waiting for the next family to come. But the doll was still there, its smile as cold and eternal as ever.